Hey guys, Stealth here. Today we're following CB Blue, C Blue 22, and it's one of those games which is pretty much in line with the game that I uploaded Monday, the V150 that could. This is going to be a game where we also have a unit that does an immense amount of damage and way more than you'd actually expect it to do. I'm not going to disclose yet which unit that is, as we're going to be seeing that soon. But for now, in this 10v10, Sea Blue with his motorized deck is starting up with a lot of Humvees, getting ready to rush on this town and making sure that he gets there before the enemy helo rush gets anywhere near. Now, as you can see, a lot of Humvees, and of course these things are pretty mobile, but it still helps if you keep them on or near the road to make sure that they immediately get underway. It's a 10v10 on a map that you don't see that often. This is Hop and Glory, and it is usually a map that you just duke out over with 4v4 or sometimes a 3v3 if you're feeling brave. But a 10v10 is pretty rare, actually. So seeing one of these 10v10 games caught my eye, and especially the unit that is going to show off its its killing skills later on in this game. And yes, this is another blue 4 game, so if you have a red 4 game that you have a unit in that does remarkably well and punches way above its weight class, then be sure to send that in. Link is in the description down below. Now let's get this deployment going. As you can see, he's getting ready with a lot of infantry, all sorts of various types. And this is probably going to be a bit busy on these dirt roads here. A whole column of Humvees, and just the sheer number tells you something about the availability and the points that they have. I wouldn't be surprised if they started out with somewhere in the range of 500 to 800, potentially 1,000 points. Now we already have the first command unit moving in. This is Captain Lath with a command infantry unit, and he immediately runs up to a whole host of enemy helicopters. Mi-8s, Mi-8 TVs. We also have an Mi-24V dealing with enemy helicopters. And unfortunately, the helicopter with the command infantry unit is the first one to go down. So, the infantry push that Sea Blue here was trying to get into that town is forced to evacuate their vehicles prematurely before they all get wiped out due to a single rocket pod strike by a couple of these helos. And just the sheer amount of infantry AA that he had here was able to wipe out the entire enemy push. Of course, there are likely to be some survivors. The question is just how many and what type. So he's immediately rushing in with some infantry here, trying to get positions before the enemy does. And the JSDF Rangers are now in a position to help out here. There goes another helo. That's the next one. Another Mi-8T, and this should be the last of them. And there we go. Now at this point, probably most of his AA infantry is depleted, or at least has fired a good amount of their weaponry. Captain MS Cool has also been firing with his stingers. We have the short arrows, which we're able to do quite a bit of damage. And right now, we're seeing the survivors from the helicopter rush here. Just a bunch of Spetsnaz. But Erwin Rommel lost almost all of his forces as he was crossing this area and trying to deploy into the town. And right now, the Spetsnaz are being completely surrounded by KM900s, Kyotoku WAPC, and a lot of Huda Ren. And even the command infantry are trying to help out, which is going to get them the attention of the Spetsnaz, and they're already taking quite a bit of damage. So time for the Huda Ren to finish off these Spetsnaz before they can make it close enough for the command infantry to actually get them killed off. There we go, 235s and the Spetsnaz are gone. Now, time to introduce the main character of this game. This is the Fiat 6616. It is very mobile, travels at 100 kilometers per hour off-road and 150 on-road, of course. Autonomy at 700 is very good. It's packed with a grenade launcher and an autocannon, and it is going to do an incredible amount of damage. One thing of note is its amphibious capability. 50 kph off-road, 50 kph amphibious means that it is one of the fastest amphibious units in the game. So this thing is going to be working miracles today. Now across the map, the scores are pretty even, despite the fact that Erwin Rommel lost a lot of his forces early on. And yes, he was able to do some damage, but the damage that he took was far greater than the 266 points that he scored. And so far the teams are pretty much tied. It's 1195 for blue versus 1145 for red, and thereby it's not that big of a difference. But I think that Erwin Rommel has lost more than enough forces and is not looking to get killed off again, so he decides to leave the game there. Of course, being at 10v10, you have the required amount of artillery, and it's currently blasting away at Golf, trying to keep these vehicles at bay, damaging them and killing the transports, making sure that the infantry here is going to have to go out and walk as they're taking fire from a VAP 2013 and assorted company, as we have a whole host of Eurocorps vehicles moving up from what seems to be 2 different players here so far. Now, large air patrol by red. We're going to be seeing that air patrol quite a few times here over India and Hotel. They just circle this area with a lot of fighters. And so much so that I find it a bit curious, because why would you want to have 4 aircraft when you can have a constant air patrol of 2? I mean, he's flying around with 5 air superiority fighters, 3 Yak-141s and 2 Su-27S fighters. I would say try to split that up, because then you can have 2 aircraft on constant patrol and making it very difficult for blue to actually do something. Whereas now you have 5 aircraft on stand down and blue has an opportunity to strike. Which, at the moment, they're not using yet. They have their own air patrol up, a couple of Tomcats, and they're way back of the lines. But they could be striking any of these positions, if they wanted to, with actually little fear of those fighters actually doing something at the moment. Now, Eurocorps' push on the right flank seems to be doing really, really well. And yes, it's not just Eurocorps, we also have some US units over here, such as the Rangers. And of course, it is now time for red to come back with their artillery strike. T-80UM, as well as Nakula, and of course the enemy artillery somewhere down here, are making it pretty difficult for the allies to keep pushing up. Fortunately, it seems to be napalm mostly, and Moose Palang's Leopard 2A4s are not taking that much damage. Right up until the point where the cluster ammo arrives, and this is when these things do start to take some damage. The commandos are panicked, but fortunately not taking any damage from the cluster munitions, as they cannot be hit by them. And this is really the only unit that they still have on the front line. Of course, the commandos are about to run into the napalm, which is going to make their day a bit less fortunate. Now on the left end of the map there's not that much going on. This is always a pretty tricky area to push, because line of sight is being hampered quite a bit by this mountain over here. You could try to push over the mountains, but then once you clear your side and move to the enemy side, there's a very good chance that you die off pretty quickly. So it's really difficult to be pushing here. And most of the time you see a push being forced on Gulf and then around this area. Which, on the one hand, is easier to do. On the other hand, it puts your forces quite far out of position. Because once your forces are all the way over there, they are, well, I suppose you could say easier to stop, because red has more air superiority that they can call out, and your fighters might not get there in time. And at the same time, red has a much shorter resupply line, whereas yours at this point have to come on all the way from over here, in the southern end of Charlie. Now, it's time for Jejoon in his Fiat 6616 to go on a killing spree. He's just going to be dipping his toes into the water first. As this is an amphibious unit, it just quickly dives into the water, and instead of using the predictable areas of these bridges to push up, he's instead using the water. And the water is, I'm not sure it's quite shielding him, but it might be shielding him from HGMs that might be fired at him. So this is a really interesting tactic of keeping your Fiat safe. He's also being joined by a KM900. These things are similarly fast off-road and in the water, so this combination could be a very interesting scouting force. Unfortunately, we have a KA-29 which is going to try and crash this party. Unfortunately for the KA-29, it gets killed off by the Fiat 6616, and the short arrow helps out a little bit there. So the Fiat can continue on its merry way. Now of course it's low enough, unlike some of these ships, to go actually underneath these bridges. And this guy is basically going on a very long-winded sightseeing tour. There's not that much that seems to be interested in killing him, spotting him, or damaging him in any way. There's just nothing around. And the interesting thing is that most of the time you see a defensive position along this tree line here. Whereas this side is not really well defended. Because you just don't expect units to either come over this bridge, because they would be shot at by your units, or to come over this bridge, in which case they would usually be killed off by ATGM infantry inside this town. So he's not really expecting the Fiat, and the Fiat actually made his next kill here. Was able to kill off a reconnaissance vehicle there. Of course now they know where it is, but is that going to stop them? Or are they going to stop the Fiat in this case? And it turns out that they are not quite interested in doing just that. And interestingly, the Fiat seems to have spotted a pretty glaring weakness in the enemy line here. He's opening up with his autocannon, not actually getting a good number of hits there, or at least not enough to kill. And using his excellent ability, he's climbing up this ridge, using the tree line for cover, making sure that he's not going to get killed off by a helicopter anytime soon, or an enemy aircraft that might come over and drop an ATGM on top of him. His buddy, the KM900, Wang over here, is still right behind him. Still pretty close, but it seems to be lagging behind a little bit. And surprisingly, there's just nothing coming out to greet him. There's nothing even remotely interested in stopping his unit. They were interested in stopping the KM900 there with the reconnaissance infantry, so his Suzak Days have been killed. But Jejoon is still going. This time around he's going solo, but he seems to be going directly for the enemy artillery, which we can see firing there in the distance from two separate launching locations. Back on the road, Jejoon is capable of getting up to 150 kph, and he is happily making use of that to quickly close the distance towards that enemy artillery. And of course we see a large air patrol here, but the air patrol does not see the Fiat. It simply does not have the capability of looking down. And as the Fiat cannot fire up, it cannot give its position away. Now I gotta say, I really like this Fiat a lot more than my own. I don't drive a Fiat anymore, but we had a Fiat Punto. This one is quite a bit faster off-road, a bit more heavily armored, and of course comes with a gun, which, I gotta say, in some situations I wish I'd had on that previous car. Anyways, moving on with the grenade launcher and the autocannon. Time to kill some artillery. The autocannon should be able to do the trick, and any infantry that might be there to stop him is also going to get a hail of grenade launcher frag grenades. So fortunately, there are plenty of opportunities to kill stuff, and this guy has plenty of weapons to do it with. And let me just show you how far this guy is behind enemy lines. This is where the blue 4 line is. This is where Jejoon has ended up. And this is a combination of good mobility as well as excellent autonomy. Time to go on a killing spree. Killed off one RM700 for 70 points. There's the second one. There's a Malka for 120 points. He already killed 440 points in the span of about 15 seconds. This unit is going to cost you only 45 points. So at this point he already scored about 10 times his own point value. And it seems that there's just no other unit nearby, as he already captured one fob. Time to go for the next artillery. We already have a couple of RM70 spotted there by Master Queef. And I gotta say, this is rather gratifying. Just seeing people who are very happily using artillery most of the time get their ass handed to them by one lonely reconnaissance Fiat vehicle here. It is nothing special. It is not particularly well armored or well armed. It's just a combination of opportunity, mobility, and just sneaking your way into enemy lines. There goes the two another RM70s, and at this point he's going to have to take some supplies from any of these fobs because his autocannon is down to 142 rounds out of 480. So time to steal another fob, and another one. He already took on all of his supply for fuel and is now completely rearmed with rounds. So let's continue the hunt. Let's see what else we can find here. The enemy air force is still going strong. We have a large-scale air patrol coming in. Or correction, the air patrol is already out. We have a large-scale air strike coming in, seemingly trying to deter the push that's going on over here. But that is not really the biggest concern for Red 4, or at least it shouldn't be, because Jejoon is still here, killing off another 100-point vehicle here, which was in fact a command unit. Next up, another command unit. Sure, why not? There's another 100 points. At this point though, the enemy air force is starting to get rid of Jejoon using just standard gun runs. He just killed off another artillery, so the enemy air force was not quite on point there. Jejoon moves on with his Fiat and is now going to kill off a couple more artillery units. 2 BM-24s. It's only 50 points each, but why not? Because Jejoon is here anyway. There goes one, the other one taking fire, heavily damaged, and there we go. Now this thing is a bit too much for Jejoon to chew up. This is a Type 59 command tank. Armor, 7 points frontally, 3 points on the side, 2 points on the back. And at this point, unfortunately, a cluster bomber flies over and ends Jejoon's killing spree. But not before he got an immense amount of damage. And I think that this does indeed trump the amount of damage that the V150 did in the game that I showed you on Monday. Or at least, points-wise or cost-effectiveness, it was much, much more than the V150. And we're going to be seeing the kill list, of course, a little later on. At this time, Blue 4 is out in force and getting ready to push on this position in Foxtrot. The enemy artillery has been silenced, making this offensive quite a bit easier. And they are happily making use of that gap in the enemy constant artillery bombardment to push up, capture the buildings, and neutralize any surviving forces here. They have mostly infantry here, a couple of leopards to back them up. This is furball. Of course you need your AA, so we also have wolverines to deal with enemy helicopters. And the helicopters are indeed coming to get these guys' revenge. So the wolverines are trying to rush into a position where they can be supportive. The M24Ps are unfortunately down in the valley, making it more difficult for the wolverine to get a lock on, but there we go. There's one kill on the M24P, and the next one should not be long. It's coming in. One wolverine missed, the second one didn't, but these things don't hit very hard. Javelin LML is only 5 HE, so especially against these Russian things, you're going to need to fire twice. These Russian things also bite back. Well, one of the wolverines has been killed off. Time for the other wolverine to reload. Of course, these things fire their weapons in triples, so he's going to have to reload all 3 tubes. Fires again. Missile goes completely off course. And the last 3 missiles all miss their mark. So we still have that one wolverine from furball. The M24 P seems to be either empty or just completely uninterested in firing at anything. But the wolverine is not able to kill it off. Now interestingly, in India, Sea Blue still has all of these FOBs. Red 4 is, I don't know, not interested in recapturing these units, or they just have not sent any ground units coming this way. Most of them are helicopters trying to rush into this position and deter the enemy forces here from coming any closer. And it seems that Juliet might be another reinforcement route for them. Of course, at this point, we have already scored 6,500 points versus 3,300 points. And especially with that offensive from Sea Blue right into the India zone, they simply lost faith in their ability to keep back the enemy forces, as more and more of Red 4 starts to surrender. Now, I gotta say, the game started out pretty balanced, and the rush that we saw earlier on from Erwin Rommel could have worked. But at some point, these guys just, I don't know, they just mucked it up somewhere. Because initially I thought, well, this is going to be a pretty interesting match. At least the team seems to be quite a bit balanced. At which point, some people started making mistakes. Only going for arty. Only going for 5 aircraft on an air patrol. And there's basically nothing wrong with sending an air patrol that large if the enemy air force is going out in strength. If they're not, and they see your 5 aircraft, and they think, okay, that's nice, that is about 700, maybe about 800 points in aircraft that we're not seeing in ground units. So they're not going to go air, they're going to go ground units, and that's exactly what Blue has been doing. They really haven't been sending out that many aircraft. to deal with any of Red Force aircraft, because they know that Red is completely superior in the skies. So they're not going to try and meet them there, they're going to try and meet them in a position where Red is just not that capable. And that turned out to be just standard ground forces and making sure that you do not go hunting for enemy aircraft. In case the aircraft do come out to play, Captain Lath over here has a combination of 2 Patriots, which should be able to deal with these aircraft pretty quickly. Of course, only 8 missiles, so you gotta keep them supplied as much as you can. But these things will be able to at least provide some cover for the forces over here. Unfortunately, at this point, Red Force seems to have mostly left. There's just not that many of them left at this stage. You can see that Maxim 762 already left right at the start of the game. Urban Rommel left after his helo rush. Fang 988 left. Julius just left. And with just about 15 seconds left on the game, there is really not that much going on. There's Ghost, or Ghosty. I wouldn't be surprised if Master Queef has already surrendered after losing all of his artillery and finding that his way of getting some kills was not that successful. So that was Sea Blue, 1916 points in kills with 95 points in losses. The losses are really, really low. 1 M18, the KM900, and the Suzak Day. Of course, we also have another loss, which for some reason is not recorded here, and that is our hero, Jejoon, in his Fiat 6616. Killed off a KA-29TB, a Plamia, 4 RM70s, 2 Malkas, 3 command units, 1 Smirch and 2 BM24s. And that's what can happen if you have one weak area in your line that these fast units can sneak through and then wreak havoc in the rear of your area. Your rear lines, your back, the back positions where you're not expecting any units to turn up. This is what can happen if you let these guys go through. And they could have easily countered it. They should have been able to see that there was a Fiat coming in. They saw it on several occasions, but for some reason they just decided not to do anything about it. So at this point, Jejoon was able to just sneak through, get the kills, and force multiple people to leave, sheerly due to morale damage. So, hope you enjoyed that game. If you have one of these games where a Red 4 unit does remarkably well, then do send it in. A link to do so is in the description down below. And I'm looking forward to covering more of these games where you have these hero-like units, which happen to be at the right place at the right time, and just do an incredible amount of damage, hitting way, way above their weight class. Hope you enjoyed the game. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, and I'll see you soon for more gameplay.